Welcome to the freaking after party. Today's desktop software designed for anal retentives is reserved exclusively for our Patreon supporters, which is you. You know, the obsession and like the fine tuning of the anal retentives in that scene was so bizarre to me.
Yeah.
Like, it was weird, right?
Yeah.
I mean, Mike, you think the whole movie was weird, but
I have so many problems with this movie. So many. Like but I also realized after talking to you both that I was probably watching it wrong.
Look, I don't think I've been slowly on the podcast talking about my journey of like as I'm exploring becoming a filmmaker and like looking at different aspects of filmmaking, I am looking at media differently than I ever did before. So like 4 years ago, I probably wouldn't have talked about the production design of a kitchen, right? And how that informs storytelling. So I don't think there's like a right or wrong way of watching anything. I think like, and I really like to, you know, keep available things that resonate and you don't know why, and things don't, and you don't know why, and that can change over time. So, but
I just listening to you both, and what resonated with you kind of helped me to understand what I was keying into and why it wasn't working for me. I think it's similar to the reasons that you're watching the different aspects of filmmaking. Like I've been doing a lot of writing lately, so I'm like really focused on the logic of the thing.
Right.
And so like this movie is built on premise after premise of things that don't make sense. And so like I was out early. But again, like I think that if I was looking at it, I wasn't as aware of the production design and the cinematography as it probably deserved. And so, you know, I think that there's another way I could have looked at it, because I also appreciate those things. I've been more plot logic first lately. So
yeah, and this movie is not a movie you appreciate for the script.
Oh my goodness.
Not at all.
Well, yeah. I have a little palate cleanser before we kind of shift into just another topic. There is a show that I have recently started watching, and it is Adventure Time.
Oh yes.
And I know you like Adventure Time, Mike. So
it.
for our Patreon people who are watching this video, I will show you the little crochet I made of tree trunks with her little apple basket.
What a great character.
But that is a show that is beloved and that I kind of struggle with. Like I can't watch more than one episode in a row because I find it to be very emotionally draining to watch. And I think part of that is like, I sometimes I'm just like, it's a cartoon. It's supposed to feel good, or it's supposed to be for kids, or what's this, you know? And then sometimes I'm watching it and I'm like, this is giving me deep, dark feelings and I don't know what to do with them. And I sometimes feel that way with, even though I feel like I'm certainly capable of like more advanced media ingestion, sometimes I'm watching something and I'm like, this is straddling tones and I'm not sure where I'm supposed to feel or think, or, you know, and that's probably the point, right? But we were talking a little bit about kind of revisiting stuff that we watched in a different mindset, in a different developmental period before we had different experiences. I'm curious what both of you, if you haven't, other than Tank Girl, like what's an experience you've had like that?
Sorry, can I ask really quick, if you feel like sharing? You said like what is Adventure Time giving you? You're like you said dark feelings.
Yeah,
like I've never watched. I know what it is, but I never watched it, so I don't. I'm sorry if people who watched it are like, obviously I know what she means by that, but I'm like,
yeah, like it's an interesting thing to think about the cartoons that we did or didn't grow up with. Like I grew up with The Simpsons and Ren and Stimpy and Rocko's Modern Life. Those are all cartoons that have more of an adult point of view, I think. And some people will jump into those as adults and be like, I can't believe kids were watching this. When I watch Adventure Time, I do feel like there's something like really light happening on the surface, and I always feel like something really dark is happening underneath. And I know that that's supposed to bear out in the story that I haven't gotten to yet. But it makes me feel kind of unsettled, where I'm like, am I supposed to be just like hoping that this boy and this puppy have a good time? Or am I supposed to be worried about what's going to happen to them? And it's hard for me to kind of get my sea legs because I'm unable to really feel too much in either direction. But again, like, I'm sure I'm overthinking it. These are like,
well, it's certainly a show that's meant to, and this is coming from like I talked to a lot of people who made that show, and they certainly intentionally designed it to operate for adults and for children, like in a way that some shows have attempted to, but not often actually works the way that this one does. And there's action and there's jokes that could clearly work for kids. Like I watched it with my son when he was really little. But there's a lot of emotional subtext. Like there's a lot of really long story arcs. There's a lot of loneliness and longing. I mean, it's about like the last human boy, basically. I think you're picking up on what the creators intended, but I don't think if it's communicating as dread, then that's probably not what they intended. And I think if you do end up following the storylines, it doesn't end. I think it's safe to say it doesn't necessarily end up at a place where you should feel worried for them.
Okay. Well, I will continue to pursue my out-of-network therapy and work on that issue separately.
Understandable. And speaking of therapy, I mean, that kind of, for me, informs the conversation we're having about media that we revisit. I have trouble accessing my feelings. And so a lot of my therapy has led me to a place where I repopulate my surroundings with stuff that reminds me of when I did have more access to my feelings when I was a young person. So one way that I found to make that happen in the limited time in which I get to do that is to watch old movies. And I've had really emotional experiences around stuff like the G.I. Joe movie. The cartoon one that came out in the early 90s, where like the emotional beats of that map to me perfectly. And then I'll try to watch some stuff from like, I'll try to watch like Wes Anderson movies that I enjoyed when I was in college, and I don't find the emotion at all anymore. Now all I can think about is, socio-cultural context, and that stuff puts me deeper into my head. So that's what I was saying. It's like it's very hit and miss. Like I'm happy to make the attempt and do this work and try to revisit things in order to access the parts of myself that elude me, but it just does not always work. And sometimes it's a disaster. But it's all on the table in the course of the work.
Yeah, that's really fascinating in terms of using it for that purpose and also being a different person, right? And engaging with it, and how the challenges of like, what movies do we revisit, or what media do we revisit where we're like wholesale garbage? Like, I know I loved it, but like, this is just completely out the door. Or is it like Tank Girl for me, where I'm like, it still holds a lot of the pieces that I appreciated, and it like gives me the warm and fuzzies, but overall it's like, I'm not going to be watching Tank Girl once a month,
I kind of think of it as like photos from when I was very young, where I don't know if I actually remember that memory or if I've seen the picture and kind of filled it in the blanks. Like I think the time in my life when a movie or a show like intersected with me is one experience of it. And then 10, 20, 30 years later, it's like a different experience. I have my own podcast about Beverly Hills 90210, where this is like the main theme is how when I was a kid, I thought one character was a hero. And as an adult, I think he's the anti-hero of all time. But also kind of realizing like, oh, I thought of this movie because of the one song, or I thought of this movie because of the theme I'm always talking about on this podcast, like being horny for that character for the first time when I was like very young, and then watching it again and seeing all the things that you didn't ever see or remember.
There is something different and fascinating that I'm thinking of as you were talking, between revisiting an old text and being like, well, that was oppressive. right? And I didn't have the language or knowledge or understanding or whatever at the time to recognize that, like, you know, Tank Girl, she wears like an Indian headdress. And I was like, oh, fuck, that's bad. I probably didn't think anything of it when I was younger. There's a difference between that experience and what you're talking about, where like your perspective on a character fundamentally changes in terms of like their goodness or their badness. And I think that's really interesting. And that feels more, that feels like less at like, you know, general education culture, like large scale social culture change, as like a perspective shift in you personally. This has only happened to me once. And it feels very dramatic. And it was a part of Buffy the Vampire Slayer. There's like a particular season, an episode where something happens, and I revisit, you know, I've seen that show 5 million times, and I revisited it at some point and was like, oh my God, the person who I thought was the bad one in this situation is not the bad one. And it was like such a brain fuck, because it with something that you're that connected to, or that like, you know, had seen so many times, to have it be like black and white or like completely reversed was startling.
Well, I think that's why it is important, and we have as many options, more options than we can handle, of course, but it's important to watch things among others. So like whether that's listening to a film review podcast hosted by people who don't share the background that you share, so that you can get a different perspective. Like, I don't know, you had like 2 women watching this movie who gave you a different reading of it, Mike. Like, I will listen to a podcast. I like the Black Men Can't Jump in Hollywood podcast, and like not only learn about movies that I maybe hadn't seen before, but also just get a perspective on something I had. And I think that's something that like, that's the chipping away against like the monoculture that was presumed in like 1993, where it was just like, everyone's going to watch this movie with the same perspective, with the same set of experiences. And we know that not to be true. And so that's like, when you're a kid and you're watching something and you don't have any experience in the world, all you can take from it is what the movie tells you to take from it. But once you've met assholes in the world, you can then start to like see that behavior in characters. Once you've like fallen in love, you can understand that story or emotional journey better than you could before. But then maybe you also lose something that you could only have experienced when you had yet to fall in love. Like there's all sorts of, that's why it's like, I'm never going to be the same person that I once was. So yeah.
That helps me to understand that if I had seen Ghost in the Machine as a 12-year-old, I would have liked that kid and I would have liked that movie.
Yeah,
but,
you might have.
Yeah, I definitely would, because that sort of kid, like that was, like you said, BK Kids Club, like you know, like that in culture, that was who, even me as a little Black kid in the ghetto, like I identified with a little smart mouth asshole who at least appeared to be smarter than all the adults around, and was going to help figure out the problem and was going to keep everybody safe. You know, and now I just have a lot of different context for it. I have, like you said, I have a lot of different life experience to bounce this off of and understand who that character is in the matrix of life, different than I would have just having a viewer experience sitting alone, watching it as a 12-year-old.
Okay, so Mike, go back in time, watch this movie as a 12-year-old, and then pick it again, you know, a month ago when we asked you to be on the podcast, and then re-record it with us.
So invent time travel technology.
Yeah.
Go back specifically to watch this movie as a child, and then and then go forward, but not all the way forward, just to when I made the decision of what movie to pick, and then to this day to have this conversation over.
Yeah,
yes,
got it.
A perfectly reasonable thing to invent time travel for.
Because of the nature of time travel, it's already in the works.
Mike, how old's your kid?
13.
Do you think they should watch this movie?
No, I do not. we have enough to sift through already in these parts. We don't need to introduce irrelevant shit from 30 years ago.
Fair.
Wow.
All right.
I mean, that's the final say, I think.
Yep. Mike, thanks so much for joining us.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.